Good morning and welcome to our annual monthly third Thursday IHE Lunch and Learn. I'm Scott Littky, the Executive Director of the Institute for Holocaust Education, along with Jane Nesbitt, our Education Coordinator. We'd like to welcome you all today. And I am the subject for today is on my recent trip to Germany and Poland as a part of the Nuremberg to The Hague program that IHE is involved in with Creighton Law School. And first of all, I'd like to thank Michael Steinberg and the Steinberg Family Foundation, who have made it possible for me to participate and to be a part of this amazing program. I'd also like to thank the Jewish Federation of Omaha and IHE for allowing and encouraging me to be actively involved in this program. The N2H program, the Nuremberg to The Hague program, has been around for a number of years now. We discussed this last year, but I just want to bring people up to speed. It is a program through the university, through the law school at Creighton University. And the idea behind it is that students study or can take their international justice class over the summer with Professor Mike Kelly, and I'm going to introduce you to a couple of the other professors in some of my pictures, who to study international justice. International justice came about after the Holocaust, or as was born out of the results of the Holocaust. It was to bring the perpetrators to justice. Now, the framework of, yes, we have to do this, was discussed, I believe, in the last months of the war, when it was apparent what the result would be. The procedure by which this was done develops at the end of the war. And I mentioned last year when I did this presentation that we commemorated, as a part of the program, the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials. Unfortunately, it had to be two years later due to COVID. And so the programs that we had were held then last year. So, for example, we had Professor John Q. Barrett, who is the expert on Justice Jackson, who served as the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials, in the first trials, and they had to come up with a whole system of how this was done. Now, the international justice today, the court, is located in The Hague, and the program actually should probably be called not Nuremberg to The Hague, but The Hague to Nuremberg. But the reason I say that is because the program itself starts in The Hague, in Amsterdam. And the reason it does is because the law students who attend this program, The Hague is on its summer recess at that time. And so in order for the students and the professors to hold classes and to visit and to see what goes on, to learn about The Hague, that's when they can do it. And so it happens that way. But obviously, as I am indicating now, the program itself, the idea of international justice, began in Nuremberg. Nuremberg was chosen for a number of reasons, one of it being that it was a city that was untouched. And so I'm going to share my screen, and I want to go through some pictures and tell stories just as far as what happens in the trip. And then at the end, please feel free to ask questions. So just give me one moment to share the screen appropriately. And I'm assuming now that you can see the screen correctly. And let me just do one thing here. Okay, I need to do one thing, and that is, okay. So this is Nuremberg. Nuremberg is an absolutely gorgeous city. And for me, that is really, I have a mixture of opinion, because I arrive, what I've been doing with the program is I leave Omaha on Monday. In this case, I left, it was Monday, the 10th of July, and I fly to Detroit, then I fly to Munich, Munich, I take a very fast train and I arrive in Nuremberg. And when I arrive in Nuremberg, both last year and this year, I was just unbelievably shocked in a positive way at the beauty of Nuremberg. And so very much in my own psyche, there's this feeling of mixture of opinion or a mixture of view. The idea that knowing what happened or knowing what Germany represented many years ago and then seeing Germany today. And so it's breathtaking. And this is just right. This is very close to where the hotel is that I stay and close to where we hold classes. This area right here is when you walk down below to the left of this picture, you cross a major street and you get to the train station. So this is the entrance into the major part of Nuremberg. And this, if you may recall, and I may have a picture of it, I don't remember. Last year I posted a picture of right in front of this is the main street of this area, and the hotel that we stay at is located right there. And also, this is the same place that just 80 years ago, 80 years ago, were these Nazi rallies that were being held. And so it's really, again, just kind of interesting. This was after in front of the hotel that we're staying at. The man in the middle in the black T-shirt is German. It's his. He is the owner of the hotel and wonderful person. The man right here, that is Michael Bryant. Michael Bryant is professor in Rhode Island and is both a lawyer and a PhD in history, and is teaches the Holocaust class that the students take, and absolutely brilliant. I enjoy my conversations very much with him. The man in the orange shirt is Professor Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly is an international expert on international law. He was just appointed to a committee through the United Nations. And of course, that's me in the picture. Again, the beauty of Nuremberg. This is as water that runs through a bridge. This is on our walk to where our classes are held. Professor Kelly and myself, we the second evening that we were there with the students, with many of the students who were there, we went out for dinner together, had some very interesting conversations. I would just want to state that the students, there were 28 students who participated this year, and they came from different locations, which is also an amazing part of this program. They were from Creighton University, which is one of the sponsors of the program, from Chapman, which is in Los Angeles, and I'll point out the professor in charge of that program, and then a scattering of people from all over the country, from Gonzaga, from a school in South Carolina, and you'll excuse me, I'm just forgetting where, but it was people from all over the country, and it's really interesting to see who makes up this program and their reasons for taking the class. Again, this is obviously a Nazi rally. This is the main street that I was talking about. And right here, right in this building right here, this is where the hotel is that we're staying at. And so it is not lost on me when I'm crossing the streets here and walking back and forth, what happened here in our, not in my lifetime, but in the lifetime of still many of us. And it is really still very much recent history. Again, here's that tower that I showed you right before. Okay, on the second day of the program, we go to Krakow. What happens is we go back to the train station, we take a train back to Munich, and then we fly into Krakow. Krakow in Poland is an old city. Krakow also, like Nuremberg, was untouched during the Holocaust. And I'm going to compare that to Warsaw in a few minutes. Again, this is close to the hotel that the three of us were staying at, the professors, or the two professors and myself. And what I want you to notice again here is just the unbelievable beauty of this city. Again, myself in the middle is Professor Kelly, and on the left is Professor Michael Basler. And Michael Basler is a very, very interesting man. He is a professor at Chapman in the law school. He is an expert on the Nuremberg trials, but also an expert on what was done after the Holocaust as far as reparations. And he is very actively involved in the Claims Council. And then, just by a side note, he is also a very close friend of former professor at Creighton University and member of our Omaha Jewish community who now lives in Syracuse, New York, Larry Rafel. And so Dr. Basler and I were sharing some very nice stories about Larry, and I shared them with Larry recently. But it's very interesting how everything is a small world. And actually, also when Mike Kelly came to be a part of the faculty of Creighton, he too was hired by Larry Rafel. So I am personally indebted to him for that, because these are two absolutely brilliant people. And Professor Basler is just very interesting. He also is, he is actually came to this country from Poland as a refugee when he was 11 years old, as a survivor of, they were able to escape. I can't remember if it was right before the Holocaust or exactly what his story is. But very interestingly, he feels very much indebted to the idea of giving back. And he has developed a program with his students, working with Ukrainian refugees who are now living in Los Angeles, and assisting them with their legal needs, mainly in guaranteeing their immigration status. His feeling very much is that it is an obligation to give back, and we're going to talk about that shortly. On the second day, the first full day that we are in Krakow, we spent the day discussing the Ukrainian situation. And Krakow is very, very close to the Ukrainian border. I believe it's under 100 miles or no more than 150 miles. And Krakow has a large population of Ukrainian refugees. And in fact, the travel agency that we work with that makes all of our bookings got in touch with Professor Kelly, Professor Basler, and myself like in March, to make sure that we were participating and what our hotel needs would be in Krakow, because of making sure to reserve them, because of also the needs of housing for refugees. The man on the left is a Polish lawyer, and he is involved in the assistance with people who are in Poland now, who are Ukrainian, and with their needs. And we heard him speak last year. Last year, it was 5-6 months into the conflict. There was still probably some optimism, some hope that things were going to be short-lived, but the reality is, knowing that they weren't. Now we're a year and a half into the Ukrainian challenges as far as with the refugees, and so obviously their status in Poland is changing, and they're assisting with this. The man with the beard, the dark beard here, is actually from the Ukraine. He goes back and forth from the Ukraine to Krakow. He is in a relatively safe area of the Ukraine, one that has not experienced the war the way some of the other areas have. His adult children are actually living abroad right now because of the situation. He still has hopes that they will come back. But they also spoke about the issue of, or the challenges that will happen, that this is in the world right now, this is the next issue of international justice. This is the next cases that will happen if and when it is made possible, more than likely, well, by the end of the challenges with Russia. There are warrants for the arrest and charges that are there existing now for Vladimir Putin. But the realism is that this is far from happening, both by the challenges that the war is going on, but also that Putin is shielded within Russia, and the places when he does leave have been places that are friendly to Russia, such as, I think he was recently in Syria. But there are the countries that he would visit right now are not ones that are going to turn him over to The Hague. Here is me. I had an opportunity to do a little teaching on Friday afternoon about what was going to be happening in the schedule. Because there is still a Jewish community in Ukraine, in Krakow, there is a very active Jewish community center. We're going to learn more about that actually in our October Lunch and Learn. There was an invitation extended. They have a weekly Shabbos dinner, and many of the students were going to attend, and I was asked to explain what that would be all about. This is in a room in the Jewish Museum in Krakow, also a wonderful, wonderful location to learn about different aspects of the Jewish life in the Ukraine. As you know, as I hope you know, the population of Poland was in the millions up until 1939. Today, there are anywhere between 6,000 and I believe 10,000 Jews in Poland. Many of them are transplants who have come to help establish a Jewish life there. Ukraine does have an active Jewish area, and it's very interesting to see. There's actually an annual klezmer event that happens there, and actually a movie festival. This is the center area of Krakow. In this area, it's a very beautiful area. Lots of restaurants, shops, artwork. In the center area here, there's lots of activity that goes on. I just found this statue to be very interesting, so I just took a picture, but I thought I'd share with you. Again, it's hundreds and hundreds of years old. As I think you know, Poland is very much a Catholic country, and there are churches almost like on every block, these beautiful, beautiful old churches. On the second day, we go to Auschwitz. We take a bus in the morning. It is about an hour and 15-minute trip to Auschwitz. There are three parts to Auschwitz. There is Auschwitz I, which I'm going to show you parts right now, Auschwitz II, which is Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, which was the labor camp, which is not open to the public. Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II are. So last year, when I attended, I took many, many pictures. Part of it was knowing that I was going to be doing a presentation. Part of it is probably in my own mind of wanting to document it in a certain way. And then what I realized many months later is that maybe I was also doing this to put a barrier between myself of what I was seeing and experiencing. Though I will tell you that last year I found this whole experience to be incredibly emotional. This year I found my emotions to be much more of this anger towards what has happened. The curator at the Bach Museum, Alex, and I were having a conversation a couple months before I was leaving, and I mentioned this, and she was telling me about how when she has her students look at art, she tells them to first put their cameras down and to just view and take everything in. And then if they wanted to take a picture, to take a picture. And that was very helpful for me. in this experience this year, as far as to try to approach it that way. The entry into Auschwitz has changed. There is a new area right before this that you enter, and it is the visitor center where you check in. You have to have a ticket. You go through security, and then you walk through a long series of tunnels where the names of victims are read, and it's all very sterile looking. There's nothing more than the tunnels, and then you come out and enter into this area. And having now done this twice, and this year being the first time within the new entrance, it very much helps in understanding that what you are about to see is not just the victimization of people, of populations of Jews, the 6 million, and in this case, the over a million that were killed here, but you're dealing with the individual narrative. Now, my Holocaust training is both in the university setting, in both undergrad and graduate school, but also was very fortunate to be trained through Yad Vashem in Israel as a part of their education program. I was very fortunate that for a number of years I was able to go back and forth to Jerusalem, to Yad Vashem, at least once a year over the course of about 6 years, to work on curriculum that we were using in supplementary religious schools, but also to be trained. And part of their philosophy, and I very much agree with this, is that you deal with the individual narrative. That is so much easier for us that we identify more with people, with names, with stories, that instead of large numbers of people. Now, it's important to know the number just because of the sheer magnitude, but in order to understand that this happened to this person, this family, to see pictures, to see their eyes, to see their possessions, really hits home, and really is something it's very hard to put into words. So with that, in one of the areas that we visit, they now have an area where I'll show you in a second. They have books of names, of where they know the victims, and whether they know their place of death, and whether they know exactly when they were born. So as you can see, I just took a picture here. You can see the name David Fisher, 1864. These are the books in one of the rooms that you visit in Auschwitz I. There are approximately 4 million names documented here. Yad Vashem, a number of years ago, this would have been about 13 years ago, made a major push to try to get as many names now as could be received with documentation, because as we know, we are now getting to the point where the survivors are leaving us quickly now, and so then is the memory. And so one of the things, I'll say this now, that I speak to the students about in the debrief, I do the debrief with the students at the end of the second day after the visit in Krakow. And one of the things I talked to them last year at Auschwitz about this year in our debrief, was that myself, as an Ashkenazic Jew, as a Jew whose lineage is from Eastern Europe, that one of the things that we say when we hear upon the death of a person, we say, may their memory be for a blessing. And then I also talk to them about how in Ashkenazic tradition, that we often name our children after family members who are no longer living, with the idea that our family members will be like that, will have the positive traits of the person they're being named after. So I tell them, for example, about my daughter Sarah is named for my grandmother Sarah, who was really the matriarch of our family, and I was the first of her 9 grandchildren to have a daughter, and I chose the name Sarah. And all of my first cousins love to tease me that that I did them wrong, because all of us wanted to name after our grandmother because she was so important to us. And that with that idea that there are so many of these names, approximately maybe over 2 million, where there will be no one to remember their memory and no one to be named for them. And that the magnitude of, it's not that we've lost this whole history of Judaism, of our people, of our history in Eastern Europe, and what that really means, the idea of the memory for a blessing, but that they're unknown. So then, after we visit Auschwitz I, just to give you some other background, this is actually a picture of the remains of one in Auschwitz II, one of the death chambers, where there would have been the dressing room where they took off their clothes, where they went into the gas chambers. And as you can see, the openings in this wall here were for the crematorium, for the ovens. And what I'd like you to also know is that in Auschwitz I, there is a gas chamber that is intact. It is quite different from this. And also the doors, also the crematorium is there too. That was left intact. Auschwitz I does have mainly, Auschwitz I is all brick buildings. Most of the buildings in Auschwitz II, the barracks, are all of wood. There are some brick buildings, but Auschwitz I was an existing complex that the Nazis took over. It was it was used by the Poles and turned into first a detention center, and then becomes this place of death, of the use of a Zyklon B, the use of the gas chambers. When it became apparent that it was not big enough, about 2 miles from Auschwitz I is where Birkenau was created, and the trains where you see the segregation, where the separation of prisoners, of Jews, the very famous Hungarian pictures from the Auschwitz album, that's where those pictures are from. So I was obviously very awestruck again by this facility. You see that there's a white chain fence in there. You cannot walk up in that area. The gas chambers in this area, some were destroyed by the Germans when they realized when they started the death marches. One was destroyed in a revolt that happened at Auschwitz, but they are in existence there, and they're very surreal to some degree. In Auschwitz I, in one of the main buildings, there is a wooden model that is on how these operated. There are 3 of these models that were made. There is one in the Holocaust Museum in DC. There's one in Yad Vashem and one here at Auschwitz. I now have seen all 3 of them. It was built by a man who made them, who actually was a survivor of the Holocaust. We know exactly how these facilities ran because of the prisoners who ran, Jewish prisoners who were forced to be in their slave labor in this area, and some survived as a part of the death marches. And there is a professor at Yad Vashem, Gideon Greif, whose main research has been on this group of people and understanding how the procedure ran, as far as how people thought that, what we know, that they thought they were going into the showers. They were told to take off their clothes, all of their possessions. They left them in the area. They were then moved into the gas chamber area. The doors were locked by this group of people. The SS were on top of the roof. They dropped the Zyklon B into the chamber. It became a gas. People died. Then these prisoners were forced to then clean out the area. At this point, if there were if they had gold teeth, if there were hair, if there anything that was on their body that was of value, mainly the gold teeth, those were taken at that point, and then the cremation process. You may remember that one of the first forms of within this idea of, we can include it, we could say it's a part of the evolution of the final solution, was the Einsatzgruppen, who after September 1st, 1939, went into the villages of Russia. This is Holocaust by bullets, pulled Jews out, took them to the fields, and executed them. This is Babi Yar, for example. Well, one of the many reasons that this form of execution was changed, excuse me, was the psychological toll that it had on the Einsatzgruppe and on those soldiers. And so, in one of the many reasons of the evolution of the process of the final solution was taking, could have been or was taking the Nazis, even though they aren't directly, but that their role in the gas chamber was dropping the gas from the top and not necessarily, and not in the other parts. Whether this was the idea of taking their own physicality as a point of whether psychological or others, I'll leave that for others to study, because in one of the things actually that Jane Nesbitt and Steve Weiss and I have talked about, and also from a play that I recently saw with the doctors who were involved in the very early stages of the euthanasia programs, when they were putting people to death, they did not see that they were violating their oath, because the people they were doing this to, they did not see them as people. They saw them as a vermin. They saw them as disease. And so they were actually solving a problem. So we're thinking about it from the other way, and they weren't. And so there's a lot of room for discussion and room for further lunch and learns and symposiums. It's one of the reasons that IHE, along with the assistance of Steve Weiss right now, that we're trying to do some work, we're developing some work with UNMC, hopefully with their ethics department, in part of the educational process, to get those being trained to doctors to also see patients with empathy, that they're dealing with people. So one of the most interesting things that happened this year leaves a lot of room for me to think about and also have discussion. At Birkenau, if you can see through the window of this van, which I'll explain in a second what it is the parking lot. The parking lot is approximately, let's say, a quarter mile away from where you enter into Birkenau. You come out of the parking lot, and this year there is a kiosk set up by a food truck selling refreshments, and over here on this table here, on this wall here, are selling Auschwitz magnets. This is horrifying. But then it also leaves open for a lot of room for discussion and education. The good news in this was that the group that I was with were also incredibly horrified by seeing this happen. Auschwitz is a national museum in Poland. Whether we say people don't quite get it, whether we say this shouldn't be what, I mean, there's lots of room for emotions here. I took the pictures because I was just so shocked by it, both cynically and as a Jew, as a Holocaust educator, as a human being, in whatever. I couldn't believe that it was there. I took very few pictures in Birkenau this time. First of all, in Birkenau, I'm going to go back. Oh, I'll leave it here. In Birkenau, I don't know if you know, but in Europe in July there was this amazing heat wave. Poland did not experience it in the same way that Southern Europe was, but absolutely did experience it. And it was probably on the day we were there about 95 degrees out, very, very hot. Birkenau is very much a very open area. And to say it was hotter than hell is both a metaphor and reality, because Birkenau is hell. And I was wearing shorts, a polo shirt. I had my head covered with a hat, and I was carrying water, and I was drinking water, and it was just unbelievable. And I kept thinking as I'm walking through, and especially as we were finishing up the last half an hour of our 6 hours in Auschwitz Birkenau, what it must have been like, and just thinking it through in my head, what it must have been like for people who were Jews who were in prison there, wearing those flannel wool uniforms, maybe having their head covered, maybe not, wearing their wood clogs, and I being uncomfortable and sweating, and I was in the appropriate clothing, and how horrible it must have been. When I got back to my hotel after a very quiet bus ride back from the experience, I went back to my room. I was by myself. I laid down for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, cleaned up, and then just wandered the city. One of my colleagues who I was with, one of the teaching assistants for the Chapman group, we were talking the next day, and she said she laid down and didn't wake up for about 3 or 4 hours later. And she was with us the last year too, so this wasn't her first time. One of the things that we did differently this year, because we had more time, was the morning of the next day, we visited more in Krakow. And this is part of the memorial for the Krakow Ghetto. And the Krakow Ghetto is, as you'll see, I'll show parts of it now. This area right here is today still an active bus station. That's where off to the area where you see the sign. But in this area right here is a memorial. The Krakow Ghetto was opened from 1941 to 1943. And these are chairs representative of this area here that was a part of the Krakow Ghetto. People are encouraged to sit there and to contemplate the ghetto, the stories of Krakow. And so it's very much an idea of both the old and the new. And Krakow is actually, as I said, you can see all these buildings are old, but I want to show you a few things about the ghetto. We also visited the area where there was detention before, was a part of the ghetto where the labor area was, where Schindler actually, where the Schindler Jews came from, where actually too, there was a Jewish cemetery, was completely destroyed. There is now only one gravestone that was back left there. It was in the area where the woman who founded what's called Beis Yaakov, House of Yaakov, which was a modern Orthodox Jewish school for women. It still is very much an organization that is in existence today, and very forward-thinking Jewish woman, very, very interesting. Again, this is that area that I was just talking about before. This woman right here is an incredible professor. She is the expert on Jews of Krakow, history of Krakow. She is responsible for the archaeological finds and development of the Schindler factory. And she is, when the first gentleman, Vice President Harris's husband, visited Krakow a few months ago, she gave him the tour of Krakow. She was also invited to be in the group of people who, when President Biden was in Warsaw recently. The wall behind you is part of what is left of the ghetto of Krakow. And you're going to see in a second, it wasn't very high. The Krakow Ghetto, in its maximum, contained 21,000 Jews. Now, in comparison, the numbers of Jews that were in the Warsaw Ghetto was as high as 400,000. So the Krakow Ghetto was quite small, and again, in existence from 41 to 43. And I believe that most of the people who came from the Krakow Ghetto were immediately sent to death in Treblinka or the surrounding death camps. Again, the wall of Treblinka, part of the ghetto. On the other side here, these are businesses that are there today. So the after we finish in Krakow, I didn't take any pictures of, I did a debriefing with the students. One of the things I asked them is, okay, now what are you going to do with what you learned? And I talk about the individual. I talk about empathy, about understanding, about what we teach about being an upstander. And very much what I talked about them in the individual idea is the idea that as lawyers, as they go forth in their careers as lawyers, they're going to be dealing with hundreds and hundreds of clients. And sometimes they themselves as lawyers are going to have rough days. And they got to see another family, another person who needs their services. And they need to understand what they mean to that family. And that to that family, how important they are, but they need to see themselves as important to that individual, and that they need to develop empathy, understanding, and the idea that they're there to help. And I think that's very important, because one of the things we learn from our survivors is not just to know what happened to them so that we know what happened, or that we know the inhumanity of the Nazis, but to do something about it, to make a difference. And so that's what I talk to them. I also explain how I'm extremely, extremely idealistic. And I believe if I can change one person, I've done my job. And so it's one of the reasons that I feel so indebted and dedicated to what I'm doing right now, in what I feel is both a professional job and my calling, and why quite often when I give presentations, I get emotional. I feel that I'm actually really happy I do, because it's not just going through the motions. It really means something. It's really, I really feel that what we are doing it has purpose and meaning, and is just so that we're there to help change the world, to make this place a better world. So one of the things that I have decided, with the blessing of IHE and the Jewish Federation of Omaha and others, is that because I have the opportunity to be in these settings, that I also need to do things to further my education, because it's very important that I continue to learn. One of the things, actually, just as someone who is Jewish, that I value is the idea in Jewish learning that we begin to learn when we are born, and that our learning should end when we die, that we're forever a learner. So I decided this year that I would go on to Warsaw for 2 or 3 days to learn about the Warsaw Ghetto, but also to see Jewish life in Warsaw. And then, just as a side note, my family, the Littke family, came from somewhere, from a shtetl area somewhere outside of Warsaw. And I wanted to connect to that, even though I have no idea where it was now. So the next morning, Monday morning, after the group now heads back to Nuremberg, I headed on to Warsaw. I took a plane from Warsaw. I was going to take a train, but it turns out it's actually cheaper right now to take a plane, and I would save some time, and I would have more time in Warsaw. And I got to Warsaw, and this is right outside of the hotel I was staying in downtown Warsaw. I was both emotionally and physically exhausted from the last week. I went to take a walk, and about 2 blocks from my hotel, I came upon this group of Haredi students, and wow, to see Jewish life this way in Poland, the old Hasidic way of Jewish life, just hit me between the eyes. Both made me laugh and cry at the same time. And I wanted to take a picture, and so I took a picture like I was taking. I didn't want to gawk and to make them think that I was making fun of them. So I took it in such a way that they wouldn't know, because I was very proud of what I was seeing, but I didn't want to do it in a way that they would think that I was doing it in a disrespectful way. The next morning, I had booked a walking tour of the Warsaw Ghetto, where the Jewish area in Warsaw Ghetto was, from my hotel. What I didn't realize that I did, I booked this trip. What I didn't realize that and this is what was just so amazing, was that I booked a tour with a private guide. So I had a one-on-one tour for the next 3 hours, walking through where the ghetto was and learning about this area. Warsaw was completely destroyed in World War II. And what is left, the remnants of the ghetto, is mixed in with the modern city of Warsaw. And I'll tell you about that in a second. This is one example of that. Below the brick area there is what's left of a building that would have been inside of the ghetto area. And above it is a modern building that is there now. One of the first areas that we came to in our walking through the ghetto area are these pillars right here, the metal pillars right here. You may recall that the way the ghetto was set up, there was a footbridge over the top of the ghetto for the residents of the ghetto to cross over, and a street below it that connected parts of Warsaw that was not a part of the ghetto. These are the part of the pillars that still remain today, and these are part of these are buildings that were outside of the ghetto. Walking through the ghetto, there are 2 synagogues that are still in existence, that were in this area. They were not used as synagogues in the ghetto. They were used by the Nazis as storage areas. This is the main sanctuary of one of them. It has been refurbished and is an existing used synagogue today in this area. And I made a donation on behalf of IHE to the upkeep of this area, to the Jewish for the Jews that I mean, obviously to keep this going. But these are not the books, but many, like the Aron Kodesh there, have all been restored, but are all from the original form. Within the ghetto, one of the areas that we went to is outside of when Jews were deported. And again, there were 300 Jews that were sent to the Warsaw Ghetto. When they were evacuated to the gas chambers, they were told to go to the train station. And this is part of the memorial outside of where that train station is. Along this path of suffering and death, over 300,000 Jews were driven in 1942 and 43 from the Warsaw Ghetto to the gas chambers of the Nazi extermination camps. All of that is translated into many different languages there. This is existing wall outside of where that train station is. You can see up here are remnants of the barbed wire. Now, in walking through from that area, we went to where the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was held. And many of you are probably familiar with Mila 18. Mila 18 was the main bunker where the suicide took place, where the Warsaw Ghetto uprising was carried from. But also next door was Mila 20. And recently, excavations have begun on Mila 20, and I was able to visit the excavation site. And these are some of the belongings that in the bunkers there of things that they found: soda bottles, scissors, tools, other bottles. And in the next couple of years, there will be a museum area there. But I felt very fortunate to be able to see that area. Some of you may know the story of Shmuel Arthur Ziegelbaum. Arthur Ziegelbaum, the grandfather of Art Ziegelbaum, who lives in Lincoln, who I'll tell you about in a second, is a national hero to Poland. He was a part of the government in exile in England, and he tried to bring attention to what was going on in Poland, meaning the extermination of Jews, and to get the Allies to do something. And he couldn't get anybody to do something when it was going on. Yes, we'll do something when the war is over with. There's been many a movie made about it. Just so you know, on November 7th, we will be showing the most recent story on Arthur Ziegelbaum, along with Art Ziegelbaum, the grandson, speaking the Polish with subtitles of the movie. I've seen it. I saw it in Lincoln last year. And Art's going to be speaking about his grandfather. There'll be lots of information out as we get closer. But mark your calendars. It's at the Jewish Community Center on the evening of Tuesday, November 7th. This is the memorial right by the ghetto, well, right by the area where the revolt occurred, to Arthur Ziegelbaum. And I told the guide, though it is a part of this tour, I said, I have to see this. If there's anything I see, this is what I have to see. And I told her our relationship to Ziegelbaum, to Arthur Ziegelbaum, the grandson. The grandfather, was told to go on a hunger strike to bring attention to what was happening. And he said, a hunger strike isn't going to do it. A hunger strike, they're going to make me eat. They're going to force me to eat, and I won't have gotten anywhere. And so he committed suicide in order to bring attention to what was happening. Unfortunately, it didn't help. And I will say, though, I asked Art once, there's a Jewish idea called Kadush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. Had that ever been used in reference to his grandfather? And he said he didn't know of it. This is what we say about the martyrs of Masada, as an example. And so in my view, Ziegelbaum, the grandfather, is absolutely an example of Kadush Hashem, of sanctification of God's name, of trying to bring attention to make a difference so that what was happening at Auschwitz, at the other death camps, would be brought to greater attention. Unfortunately, it didn't. But today, Ziegelbaum is regarded as a national hero in Poland, and this is the memorial to him right within the confines of what is today the ghetto. And the ghetto is the city of Warsaw, and so much so, which I'll show you in a second what I mean by that. This is the memorial outside of Mila 18 to the Warsaw Ghetto, to those who died. You'll notice in the Jewish tradition of marking places like this with stones. I did find a stone and did put one on top of it. So you see here, these are markings throughout the city of Warsaw, that these were the places where the Warsaw Ghetto, the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto were. And this is actually the entrance into a park when I was walking back from my tour, but these are all over Warsaw. And I had a very interesting thing happen. On my first day, when I showed you the picture of the Hasidic Jews, I was walking around Warsaw, just trying to get my bearings, also just trying to debrief and get my head together what I had experienced. And I was so focused looking forward, I didn't notice that below me were these markings. And when I came upon the first one the next day with the tour, I was thrown back that I didn't even notice it the day before, because I was so focused with looking ahead and not looking down. But these are all over the city, and they mark the Warsaw Ghetto, which I said had as many as 400,000 Jews in it. So it was a huge, huge area. Now, outside, right next to Mila 18, is this memorial. Maybe you've seen pictures before. Across the street is where the Ziegelbaum Memorial is. But this is the memorial to the victims of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In the background there's also a there's also a copy of that at Yad Vashem. The marble here was procured from what was left from the Nazis. Were going to make a monument to the death of, or the complete annihilation, I believe, of the Jews of Poland, and this was the marble that was used for this memorial. Now, this is on one side of this area here. On the next side is the Jewish Museum, the Poland Jewish Museum, which is a museum to the history of the Jews of Poland. And I had a chance to go through it the next day. And some of you may remember, in my first year of being the executive director, we brought in a scholar, Barbara Kirshabov Griblat BKG, who was one of the founders of this museum. She's now in retirement. She's an American historian, brilliant. Her father was an artist who there also was an exhibition. We had an exhibition of his copies of his work, but I wanted to see this exhibit. I wanted to see, so that's how I spent my last full day in here, seeing this museum. This is the museum, and this is taking a picture of the museum directly from the where the memorial is. And I believe, let me just make sure. I think this is my last picture. I thought I had one more. Yeah, this is my last picture, so I'm going to stop sharing here. The museum is fascinating, and especially given that in the course of my family also being Polish, it was just fascinating to be able to see what the history was. There also is a wooden shul in the museum to show, I believe it's from about the mid 1800s, and there's actually a documentary, at some point maybe we'll show it, on how they actually built this inside to be able to stand inside of the sanctuary to get inside the museum. Just as a side note, Marty Schukert, when in designing Bethel Synagogue, and I believe in the work that he also did with Beth Israel, definitely at Bethel, the roof of the main sanctuary is modeled after the idea of those synagogues. Okay, those synagogues. Toba, go ahead, take yourself off mute. You wanted to say something?
So I'm just curious. Well, I'm curious about a lot. That was amazing. The buildings that you're not allowed to see at Auschwitz, so is it just to preserve them, to preserve their integrity? I'm just curious.
So I can tell you on twofold. And part of it, I have to say, I'll give you three answers. Part of it, I don't know with some of them. In Auschwitz I, there is a building in which some medical experimentation was done. That is, it's barracks or room, building 11. You're not allowed to go into that. In Birkenau, most of my understanding, now this is actually something I learned this year, Mengele's experiments were mainly done in Birkenau, and that building is off limits. Now, many of the buildings of Birkenau, the barracks, there were hundreds of barracks, were taken down for numerous different reasons. The barracks that There are some that are being preserved. There's some that are preserved. You go into in one area, which is, I believe, the women's area. Those barracks are brick, which I didn't realize last year that there were some brick ones in Birkenau, but the vast majority of buildings are wood. The main area where you see like the train area, I don't have a picture this year where you see the trains going through. You always see the gate of Auschwitz I, and then Birkenau with where the trains went through. And I was always, I guess I knew they were different, but I didn't realize that they were two completely different areas. Auschwitz III, which is where the labor camp was, I actually don't know why they've never opened that up. And so that's actually something for me to research at this point. But I will tell you, what you can see is really overwhelming. I had some very interesting experiences in the debrief. And at this point, I'm going to open this up to questions. So please feel for anybody after this. In Auschwitz I, you see a lot of artifacts. So you see things like the suitcases, or you see the what hit me last year were the house keys. And what the guide who I went through last year was saying, part of it with the keys and also the pictures, people's family pictures, is, and I think this is very intrinsically Jewish. We see the good in anything. In everything we do, we try to be optimistic. And it really hit me in the face last year. These people thought, we're going to go home. We'll live through this and we'll go home. And, as we know, for the vast majority, this didn't happen. And so to me, the idea that we teach by narrative, that we teach by individual, that we teach by family story, really, really is how we keep the memory alive, how we make people realize that this is not about it, that this is about what the inhumanity of what people do to each other. And so it's really kind of wild, but some people have, when they see the artifacts, they're not. I had a person who was very not negative about it, but wasn't sure that these were being shown for the right reason, meaning that, and so I got to do a lot of thinking about it. So, for example, there is a box in which they have human hair. I mean, it's quite large, and it's to show the magnitude also of how many people. And was this necessary to show? Is it necessary to show all of these? Also, traditionally, Jewishly, we and again, well, we have that one of the reasons that Jews traditionally don't have open caskets when somebody passes away is their nefesh, their soul has left their body, and we don't want to embarrass the body. We don't show. There's probably other reasons. One of my mentors would say, if there's lots of reasons, it means there's no one direct correct reason. But we really respect the idea that we don't show the body in death. Okay, and so it was kind of interesting. I really, when this woman said, was it necessary to have the hair, and with this idea, it's causing me to think about that quite a bit, and I don't have an answer yet. I don't know if I ever will. But I think that the things you see in Auschwitz I really hit you in the face. You are not allowed to take pictures in the inside the gas chamber and where the crematorium was. It's up in my brain. I mean, that's all I needed. I will tell you that what's very interesting. In the Nuremberg trials, in the original 22 that were tried, was the commandant of Auschwitz Birkenau. His residence was in Auschwitz I, if right here was the gas chamber and the crematorium, less than 500 yards over a wall was his residence. And yeah, exactly. And actually, when he was taken after his family wanted to stay in residence there, which is like both grotesquely disgusting and amazing. There's a new play about that I got to see when I was in DC. It's going to be in New York next year, and we'll see. I'd love to accompany a group about how the Nazi elite, those who ran the camp, how they use the recreation time. And it's fascinating, and about pictures, that an album of pictures, more about that at another point. But they really did not, they really saw this differently. I mean, it's grotesque. But in that area there outside were the gallows that was built, that were where the execution of the commandant was carried forth. And then I believe within a very short term, and it may have even been the next day, Auschwitz Birkenau opened up as a museum, and it's a state-run museum, and that itself is very interesting. We did have a discussion the next day about anti-Semitism educationally in Poland, meaning I did not personally experience any, but the woman I showed you, the professor, there's an exhibit that opened up, and they had some very interesting materials to go along with it that the state said they couldn't show because they didn't like the message it was showing, and they were forced to change it to a very patriotic Polish display, which basically was contrary to this. I don't quite understand intellectually. Poland Germany has accepted complete responsibility and is really very progressive in how they teach about and how they handle certain aspects of the Holocaust. Poland today, yeah, there are a lot of questions to be answered, but the more upfront they are about it, I would encourage you to read a very interesting article, and I'd be happy to share it with you if you email me, by Clint Smith from the Atlantic magazine in November, about monuments and about how Germany has confronted the history of the Holocaust based upon, in the United States, how we won't address certain times in our history, mainly slavery, and use it as a means to learn from things that shouldn't have happened, and not move forward with it, but use it to make sure these things don't happen again. And Clint Smith is an amazing professor from out east, and he's written about this, and it really hit home for me. Just Jane and I were having a discussion about it, because in his lecture, I moved back to Omaha from the Washington, D.C. area. I lived in Alexandria, Virginia, and the main road in Alexandria used to be called, up until about 2-3 years ago, Jefferson Davis Highway. And I always obviously it hit me in the face, this is a man from the Civil War, and this is wrong, but not in the same way of thinking about it in terms of what it must be like for a person of color to see that, in comparison to, as a Jew, if that street was called like Adolf Hitler Highway. And I'm not at all trying to make a joke. I'm trying to say that, that obviously that this is just not appropriate. So, in conclusion, before I take more questions here, I take very seriously that my learning is ongoing. How did this year affect me? I'm still processing that. As I said, I left with a weird type of anger from the day. Somebody said that I'm experiencing the levels of grief, and I don't know if that's true. I went back and looked at it, and anger is first. So I had last year the emotional feeling, and now the anger. So I don't know but yeah, I think it's a part of it. It's a really interesting place, and I feel very fortunate that I'm able to keep my learning going, and that I'm able to bear witness each summer now to be there. Just as a side note, next year for me is going to be even more interesting, because, see if I can get through this without crying. Next year, I'll be leaving Poland to go to Israel for my daughter's wedding. So I'll be going from witnessing what happened to our ancestors to going to Israel to see my daughter get married, to the perpetuation of the Litkes. And in fact, so it's going to be very real in that way too. also, in the same way, there is a high school program called March of the Living, which also Lynn Saltzman, who's on this, participated in, because there's an adult program of it too, where mainly high school kids, and we used to have a large select people who used to go from Omaha. Maybe at one point we will, now that it's post-COVID, hopefully, that they go to Poland. They do the march. They do a march at Auschwitz, and then, as you probably know, in modern Jewish history, they experience Yom HaShoah there, and then they experience Yom HaAtzmaut, the birth of the state of Israel, how we celebrated exactly a week later in Israel. So they go from the lowest point in Jewish history, modern Jewish history, to the most amazing point of our recent history. And so, again, I feel very grateful to be able to participate in this. I'm also extremely grateful to the professors I work with. I am not in academia, and I very much appreciate the discussions and the participation I'm involved in, and I am beyond honored to be able to lead what I do with the debrief. It is amazing for me to be a part of it, but I hope that I do an admirable job in doing it, and it is truly an honor. And as I said in this, as Elie Wiesel said, that we have to bear witness to this, but it's not just bearing witness, it's doing something with it. And that's why he was so, he felt so charged. People asked him, well, why do you keep putting yourself back into these situations? And he's, I'm paraphrasing this, but he basically said, he has to. It is in order to make purpose in this, we have to keep doing this. And so I will continue doing this for as long as I can. Just as a plug for this, the summer of 2025, we hope to be doing a community trip at the same time with this, and stay tuned for more details about that. It should be amazing. We're going to do parts of it with part of the population of Creighton alumni, and I've been trying to recruit some others and recruiting all of you. Jane is also going to be accompanying us on that time too. And so with that, if you would like to take yourself off mute, I'm going to put myself back on gallery view so I can see, and I will be happy to take any questions. And I can't believe I've talked as long as I have. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
Two quick questions and a comment. The Auschwitz Birkenau State Museum, where is its exact location?
It's Auschwitz. It's at Auschwitz.
4 million.
Go ahead, Steve. It's at Auschwitz. It's right there. I mean, the museum that I was at. I mean, Auschwitz Birkenau has been turned into this museum. So you're walking exactly. Okay. You're walking right in the in those footprints, and even to a point too where people actually in Birkenau, there's an area where people are still like looking down on the ground and finding things like a nail or something like that. Nothing like and there's an area where people leave those for the archaeologists there for documentation. I do for my own personal. I always grab a rock and put it in my pocket. I want to. That's my way of having a physical connection. Other questions, Dave? You're on mute.
The Auschwitz Birkenau State Museum is at Auschwitz Birkenau. Yeah,
it's right there. I mean, I don't even know if that's the official name, but the area was turned into a museum. It's both by amazing coincidence, though my mentor will say there's no such thing as a coincidence, and whatever, that this horrible place stands, because most of the places of these where these killing fields are gone. They were destroyed. And so, I don't know if you remember Rose Vinny talking about with her father when they visited Treblinka and they walked around Treblinka. He would say, no, that was over. The guide would say, well, this is where this was located. And Joe was saying, no, it was over here. And so, it's whereas in Auschwitz Birkenau, we see it exactly where it was, exactly where these locations were. So it's pretty fascinating.
My second question is, did you visit the cross at Auschwitz?
Okay, so if you're talking about where the seminary is, where the nunnery is, we saw it on the way out. We saw where that area is, and what Steve is talking about is there is a nunnery that is located outside of this area. There, and they wanted to do some more things with that. Yeah, it's look. I want to play both sides of this. There have been, I was doing some reading afterwards about the feelings towards having this in this area, and you can take either side.
When was it built?
It was built after the war. I couldn't tell you exactly when it was built. I mean,
But since the Holocaust.
Yeah. It wasn't there. It was right, but it was done. Like, here's the thing. And I want to preface with this, that I'm on both sides of this. Okay, I try to see both sides of it. Poland is a Catholic country. They are trying to honor the memory in some way too. Okay, does it cross the line? Well, I could see where people would see that, where they would see that, where they would see that too. Now, how do I feel about this ice cream stand and magnets of Auschwitz? You know, I really wish that was not there. Okay. I mean, I really am bothered by that. But you know, there's also a point of what you should focus your attention on. I wasn't going to focus my attention on, I mean, as far as that, like, is that a winnable battle at this point? And it isn't. The nunnery, there was going to be a whole lot more there that is not there now. I mean, meaning, you know, education that they wanted to do there.
Yeah, if you want some further reading about the nunnery and the cross at Auschwitz, I'd recommend James Carroll, Constantine's Sword. James Carroll was a Jesuit priest. He wrote this phenomenal book, Constantine's Sword, and this is a Catholic man giving his perspective. Yeah. I'd recommend that.
Thank you.
The other comment I want to make, and then I'll let others speak. You reference Clint Smith in the article in the Atlantic. I read that article. That actually, Mr. Smith is a very complicated individual, and this whole subject is very complicated. And I'm happy to discuss it privately with you at some time. Let me say that there are some concerns about Mr. Smith, and there are some concerns about Holocaust distortion in some of the things he talks about. Again, we can talk about it privately.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Dr. Smith is there's also with some of where some of that material came, but from what I have read of his and the article and hearing him speak, I think some of it is misunderstood, and even where some of that material came from. But we can talk about that at another point, Steve. Any other questions? So the next 2 months, we are going to spend looking at the Ukrainian refugee situation, and as it compares actually very much in a modern idea of both what we're seeing as educators and what we've seen done to our people. And we have two next month. Hillary from Jewish Family Service does an art program by Zoom, actually, in the Ukraine with refugees. She's going to talk about it. And then we have another wonderful person, Suzanne, who is going to be speaking. Grew up here in Omaha, runs a nonprofit, and I asked her to be our presenter in October on the work she's doing. She's been going back and forth to Krakow at the Jewish Community Center about every 2-3 months. She formed a nonprofit working with Ukrainian refugees and children, women, to try to help them process the horrors of what they're dealing with. So I thank you all for being here, and look forward to continuing this discussion. Anybody who would like to continue the discussion with me offline, send me an email. I'm happy to arrange a time to speak. And with that, I'm going to ask
Scott,
Jane.
what was the name of the gentleman you referenced that you saw his memorial? And there's
His name is Arthur Ziegelbaum. And when I'm working from home the rest of this week, I will send you some information about him. It's absolutely fascinating. His grandson, his grandson is a retired professor in Lincoln, and he is a unbelievable hero. There's a memorial to him also at the Ghetto Fighters Museum in Israel, and his grandson lives in Lincoln. And so we are going to be honored to be able to show the movie, and Art's going to also speak about his family. So it's going to be a wonderful evening. So great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Jane, sign us off.